Guys, welcome back to my channel again. This video is a part 3 of the series of periodontal surgery by Dr. Melker. I asked her permission to post it and he's agreed. You are lucky to learn from the greatest periodontist and prosthodontist guy. Here we go.
And the bone mimicking each other. It's going to be a perfect relationship. No margin is located on any tooth anywhere when we are finished with biologic shaping, which again, we're hours away. So we're doing this case together, and all my cases must have cores where needed and provisionals. I have to have provisionals. I can't treat an old crown. It's impossible. That's my opinion. So I took my finger and I felt it, and there's a very large exostosis, huge. And I can tell you, you must be very slow and very meticulous when you're laying your flat back. And you would probably, we're going to talk about it, but you want to come all the way up here in the middle of the tuberosity. You don't want to be out here. That's where the bone is. And then you would work your way around. We know you're going to be doing a full thickness flap, going in and out, around and in and out, removing any granulation tissue or the sulcular area. But you're going to want to go right to the bone, as we said, and then what are we going to do? We're going to take our elevator out, and we're slowly going to start to reflect the tissue back, very slowly, because we have to move it off the bone. This is very irregular bone. Look how thick it is here, look how thick it is there, and we want to reflect our flap back so that we can treat all the bone and not traumatize the flap. So I'm going to push the flap back so I can treat the bone, but I still want to keep the periosteum maybe even 10 millimeters higher so I can suture to it. But so look at the bone, it's quite irregular. So here's the bone before. Now notice we have shoulders. If my restorative dentist had placed a core out here, I would have been fine with that. But because they're so close to the furcation, I'm going to tend to want to remove these shoulders. And again, when we talk about biologic shaping, it's going to be much more than just whittling on the tooth, and you're going to see why. But so we've done our massive osseous surgery, and our flap is sleeping. You don't even see it. We did our osseous, we did our tooth, removing all irregularities, and we created a parabolic architecture. We also removed these shoulders. And as long as the dentist places a chamfer margin when I'm finished, it won't matter. We will have no pulpal involvement, we'll have nothing. Notice how all the tissue is gone from the distal. We'll replace it, it's in the flap right now. But remember that big area of bone? It's all gone. See how far the bone came out here? It's gone. See, now it comes back and follows the proper contours. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if you can imagine now what everything looks like when we get to doing osseous, it's going to be much more meaningful to you because you've already seen it. I like to use a diamond round burr, a number 6 diamond round burr. If you've been doing osseous surgery for 10, 15, or 20 years, you could use a carbide burr, but I can tell you, when you first start out, a carbide burr is way too aggressive, and you can really destroy the bone with it. So my recommendation is to use diamond burrs. Again, a lot of you all that probably are looking at this have used carbide burrs for years, and I have no problem, but they can really ditch the bone. And if you have a large marrow space and you hit it, you can take a carbide burr right through the hole that's the marrow space and hit the root. So that's what I use. I would recommend everyone use it. Though we're stepping ahead, it's giving you a chance to see. So there's our huge exostosis. And you know what that circle represents? That's the coal. The area that is nothing more than epithelium, as you can see here and you can see here. That's a concavity. You cannot keep that. It's impossible. Because when you make your incisions going as far as you can, you're only going to be able to keep to here from this far from the lingual to the buccal and this far from the buccal to the lingual, which is fine. You don't have to worry. You'll get as close to primary closure as you could get. And that coal, the reason why we don't want to keep it is because it's all epithelium and it's very weak. You don't want to carry weak tissue in your flap. So it's good that it's gone. And so we sutured back. And I want you to see this so when you look at your own surgeries, that's as far as you could go. That's as far as you could go, taking your flap and closing it because the coal was present. Who cares? You have dense, thick connective tissue, and that's going to migrate, and it's going to fill in with connective tissue, and you probably will not even get a coal again. You'll have a thick, dense area here, which is wonderful for healing. And just to show you, I could have been a little more aggressive in removing the concavity on the bicuspid. See, what I want to do is have you to look at things that I could have done better so that when you're doing it, you say, I saw this and I remember it. We need to make sure floss works and a curette works. So this little area of tooth remaining would be better if it was gone. Then floss works perfectly and a curette works perfectly. And as we get to suturing, you can see one of the primary keys of suturing is to get the tissue so it's immovable, particularly on the line angles. Because if the tissue is immovable and tight up against the bone, guess what? At a week, you will not even know you did surgery and your patient will have minimal discomfort. I couldn't help this. You can't help it. You don't want to take bad tissue ever in your flap because it won't heal well. And many times it'll look okay for a couple of years and then you'll wonder why there's breakdown, and it's because the tissue is not healthy. So another case, you've taken your finger, you feel the huge exostosis present. You see, what are you doing? You're making your diagnosis and treatment plan before you ever start. You already know what to do. You already figured out I must do a full thickness flap and I must go at least to this portion with my elevator. Now, because we understand each other, this is the coal area. It's weak tissue. May have been caused by the provisional being a little too close to the tissue, which if you all hopefully saw my part 1, the other 7-hour program about, peri-restorative, that's key is not to have your provisionals before surgery too close to the tissue because it will cause necrosis. And that's what you see here. Had the provisional probably been a little higher, this papilla would have been in here and I could have used more tissue. But so I made my incisions. Like we know, we're going to go as far to the lingual as possible, and then we're going to hit our buccal bone when we're curving around the teeth, leaving only the sulcular tissue. And then we're going to take our elevator and we're going to reflect it back over the bone very slowly. Remember I said push a little here, push a little here, and you have to feel the bone. This elevator, if it's not on bone, will perforate the flap, which is a big problem. So you can see where I am, and I'm doing my osseous. See, I corrected the bone, and my flap is up here. It's sleeping. If I was to remove my elevator, it would drop right down. Again, another mistake. This flap should have been carried one tooth over. See how the tissue's white? It's being traumatized by me. Now, I'll get away with it because I still am pretty cautious with what I'm doing, but if I was a little aggressive here and bent this back, I could create a necrotic area of vascularity and that flap could slough, and it would be all my fault. Mine totally, by not following my own recommendations to you. Extension is a key here. One more tooth, you could go right there and you'd be a winner. So learn from my mistakes. That's why I'm not sitting here showing you perfect cases. I want to show you where I got away with it because I was gentle. And notice all the work that I did, all the osseous that I did, and look at the tissue. It was sleeping. So when it goes back, it's sutured in place. It cannot move. My sutures are where, even though we're not even close to getting to suturing, they're up where the periosteum was. So I can still make this flap immovable, even though I did massive osseous surgery. And so when we look down, remember the colds, remember that area? So that's as far as we could go buccally and lingually, and I'm pleased. I do a lot of mattress sutures, and when we get to that, we'll talk about it. And I also hear people talk about, well, try to do as few sutures as possible because it causes little hematomas. And all I can tell you is for 40 years, I did as much suturing as I could. And I used a 5-0 plain gut suture or a 6-0 plain gut suture. They resorbed it 5, 6, 7 days, and the tissue you couldn't even tell it was reflected. So the concern about little hematomas to me is silly. If you have a flap treated atraumatically and it's bound down and is not movable, I never pack, I never put that perio pack on, I never have. This flap can't move, and it's bound down, and in a week you won't even know that I reflected a flap because it had maximum nutrition from the bone. And there's just the periosteum catching my flap all the way high up into the vestibule and making sure it's immovable. And then how do we do mattress suture? I'm coming around from the buccal, and I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to enter here going towards the distal in a parallel fashion to the flap. And then I'm going to come out and then go around and I may catch the flap here and go and do that, which is what I did. Go here and then go and catch the straight on the lingual and come right back out. And so the bottom line is when we get to suturing, I like to see as many sutures as possible. This is 20 years later. How does it look? Notice everything's happy. If the patient had a dark substructure, so you see a little darkness, that's because, again, it's the posterior, cosmetics is not an issue. And all of my restorative dentists left their margins super gingival when we're doing our final restorative, as you can see. All super gingival margins, zero recession, zero anything. That's perfect. The tissue has no clue. So let's go through a case, though it's quite early in our learning process. If I can show you certain things now, it will mean more to you when we do the cases because you'll be ready for it. Rather than me surprising you, you'll be ready. So what did we do? First, we felt the bone, so we know it's prominent. Now, we all see this little kind of demarcation. Do you actually know what that is? That was the previous crowns present causing an inflammatory response in the tissue, and this is granulation tissue, which is very poor tissue, and you never want to keep it in your flap. So remember this line. Now, when we're going to take our provisionals off, we always use a forceps, and we only move at the incisal edge of the provisional because we place our provisionals on with Durolon. Durolon cannot take torquing. So when I wiggle my provisional back and forth, it comes off very easily. If I was to grab the provisional, say 3/4 of the way down with my forceps and pull, I could probably break the core or break the tooth. But if I wiggle each tooth gently back and forth, the Durolon will separate easily. So where is my incision going to be? It's going to be into that area where we know this is granulation tissue. And we're going to do what? We're going to make sure that incision is angled to hit the bone. We already know we want to do a full thickness flap. We already know that our incision, it's crucial not to go out into the tissue too far because the bone is present. And we're going to want to remove the granulation tissue. I keep stressing these things so little by little. By the time we're done, you're going to be bored of me because you're going to understand everything so thoroughly. Why don't we want granulation tissue? Histologically, it's terrible. It's not connective tissue. It's full of inflammatory cells. It's full of blood vessels. Everything that we don't want in tissue, it has. So histologically, you need to understand this. And so there is my incision. I'm going to leave the granulation tissue and the sulcular tissue on the tooth. And I take my elevator and very slowly push the tissue back. Now here, I woke up, I'm getting brighter. We're treating these teeth, but yet I made my incision at least another tooth fuller, over. And if I have to, if I see the bone continuing, because I didn't do a vertical incision, I'll just go around, the angle, like here, and put another incision there to free up the tissue from the papilla and push it back. But we're going to treat this large exostosis. Now stop for a minute. Think of all the times you see cases where they talk about make a small flap. You're treating one tooth, make a small flap. Well, what are you going to do with the bone? That's why cases fail.